I used to laugh whenever people said memory fades with age. It was just one of those things you heard on TV or read in magazines. But when I turned 65, the laughter stopped. It began with small things, forgetting where I put my keys, leaving the kettle on, missing my doctor's appointment. I brushed it off, telling myself everyone forgets sometimes. But then, the gaps grew wider. One morning, I was driving to the grocery store, a route I'd taken for 20 years. Halfway there, I froze. The street names looked unfamiliar, the turns felt wrong, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. That was the first time fear truly settled in. My wife noticed it before I did. She'd ask a question, and I'd repeat the same story twice, sometimes 3 times. At dinner, I'd lose track of the conversation halfway through a sentence. "You just told me that," she'd say softly, but her eyes carried worry. I began writing notes to myself, little reminders taped on the fridge, the bathroom mirror, the dashboard of my car. By the end of the week, the house looked like a crime scene made of yellow sticky notes. Each one screamed the same silent truth. Something inside me was slipping. At night, I'd sit by the window and wonder if this was it. If this was what everyone meant when they said, "Old age catches up." Maybe memory loss was just normal. I told myself to accept it, but deep down, I couldn't. Then came the day I forgot my granddaughter's name. She ran up to me, smiling, her little arms wide open, and for 2 long seconds, I couldn't recall what to call her. Her name, my own flesh and blood, lost somewhere in the fog. I laughed it off, pretended it was nothing, but that night, I cried. That moment broke something inside me. I realized this wasn't just forgetfulness, it was the slow fading of who I was. I needed to know why it was happening, and if there was anything I could do to stop it. That's when I began my search, not for medicine, but for understanding. I didn't want another prescription, I wanted answers. And the truth I found changed everything I believed about aging, memory, and the human brain. But before the discovery came the struggle. And that's where my story truly begins.
After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house reminded me how fragile I'd become. I kept replaying the moment I forgot her name. That little face, confused, still smiling through my hesitation. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. Instead of reading the news, I typed one simple question. Why am I losing my memory? The screen filled with hundreds of articles, studies, and advertisements promising miracle cures. But somewhere among them, I started to notice a pattern. Almost every source mentioned one thing in common: lifestyle. It wasn't just age. It was how I lived, what I ate, how I slept, how much stress I carried. It was the silent wear and tear of decades of routine. Too much coffee, not enough water, skipped breakfasts, late nights, and constant worry. Somewhere along the way, I had traded health for habit. I began with the simplest change: food. Instead of toast and butter, I switched to oats, berries, and walnuts. I added leafy greens to every meal and cut down on sugar, even though I loved my evening cookie with tea. And slowly, I began to notice something subtle. The afternoon fog in my head started to lift. My curiosity grew. I read about how the brain feeds on nutrients, not just calories, but vitamins, minerals, and healthy fats. Omega-3s, magnesium, B vitamins. They weren't just buzzwords anymore. They were building blocks of memory itself. I realized I'd spent decades feeding my body, but starving my brain. Still, it wasn't just food. Sleep had become another missing piece. I used to think sleeping 5 hours was a sign of productivity. But every article, every doctor's note said the same thing. Without deep sleep, the brain can't clean itself. It's during sleep that our memories are organized, repaired, and stored. So I began treating sleep as sacred. No screens an hour before bed, dim lights, soft music, a warm shower, and a small gratitude journal by my side. Each night, I'd write 3 things I was thankful for. Some nights it was simple. The smell of rain, a phone call from my son, the sound of laughter from next door. Gratitude slowly replaced fear. But even with these changes, something still felt incomplete. I was improving, yes. I could recall phone numbers again, and conversations no longer vanished mid-sentence, yet a deeper clarity was missing. It wasn't until I met an old friend at the park that the missing piece finally revealed itself. His name was David, a retired biology teacher who always carried a smile that felt 10 years younger than him. We talked for a while, and I mentioned my struggle with memory. He listened quietly, then said something I'll never forget. He said, "It's not your age, it's your connection. The brain is like a garden. If you stop tending it, the weeds of forgetfulness take over." He explained how mental stillness and focus weren't luxuries, they were nutrients too. Stress, constant news, endless noise, all of it exhausts the mind's energy. Then he leaned closer and said, "Try changing just one thing, how you start your morning." I asked what he meant, and he smiled. Before the coffee, before the phone, before anything, sit in silence for 5 minutes and breathe. Train your mind to be present again. It sounded simple, too simple. But that night, as I sat on the edge of my bed, I realized simplicity was exactly what I'd been missing all along. I decided that the next morning, I would change that one thing. And that small change would end up transforming my life. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still soft and gray, and the air carried that quiet chill that only dawn can hold. I made my usual cup of coffee, but didn't take a sip. I set it aside, sat by the window, and did what David had told me. Nothing. No phone, no television, no thinking about the day ahead. I just sat there and breathed. In and out. At first, it felt awkward. My mind kept wandering to bills, appointments, the news, the weather. But after a few minutes, something strange happened. The noise began to fade. For the first time in years, I noticed the rhythm of my own heartbeat, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. Life hadn't gotten quieter. I had simply started listening again. That morning, I took my coffee outside and watched the sun rise behind the trees. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized something profound. My memory loss wasn't the disease I thought it was. It was a symptom of disconnection. My mind had been overloaded, overstimulated, overfed with worry, and undernourished with peace. From that day on, I made it my ritual. 5 minutes every morning of silence. Sometimes I meditated. Sometimes I prayed. Sometimes I just watched the light move across the room. And with each passing day, something shifted. The fog began to lift further. I could recall names, dates, small details that had once vanished into thin air. My energy improved, my mood felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving my days, I was living them. It wasn't long before my family noticed too. My daughter, Emily, smiled one evening and said, "Dad, you seem different, happier." I laughed and told her, "I started breathing." She looked confused at first, but then she nodded, as if she understood something deeper than words could express. As weeks turned into months, the changes compounded. I found myself remembering old songs from my youth, the lyrics coming back effortlessly. I could recall stories my father once told me, smells from my childhood kitchen, even the sound of rain on the tin roof of our first home. It was as if my memories hadn't disappeared. They were just waiting for me to slow down enough to find them again. But perhaps the most beautiful moment came one afternoon while I was gardening. I was pruning the roses when my granddaughter ran up to me, laughing, her little hands full of petals. She said, "Grandpa, remember when you forgot my name?" I froze for a second, my heart tightening. Then she giggled and said, "You never forget now." She was right. That single line, "You never forget now," became my reminder that healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it begins with presence, with silence, with one small act of awareness, repeated every day until it reshapes your entire life. Later that week, I visited David again at the park. I thanked him for what his advice had done for me. He smiled, the same calm smile he always wore, and said, "You found the key, didn't you?" I nodded. "You were right," I told him. It wasn't age, it was noise. David cluckled softly and said, "Most people think getting older means slowing down the body, but really it means slowing down the mind." Then he placed a hand on my shoulder and added, "Keep tending your garden, my friend." Those words stayed with me long after that day. Because he was right. The garden wasn't just my brain, it was my entire way of living. And tending it meant more than eating right or sleeping better. It meant being present, every single day. Little did I know, this change in mindset would soon lead me to one more discovery, the missing nutrient that tied everything together.
Weeks later, I was reading an article about brain health when I stumbled upon something that caught my attention. It wasn't a pill or some expensive supplement. It was a single concept: nourishment through simplicity. The author explained that our brains thrive not only on nutrients, but on rhythm, the natural balance between stimulation and rest, input and stillness. And suddenly, it clicked. That one thing I had changed, those 5 minutes of silence every morning, wasn't just meditation. It was nourishment. I had been feeding my brain peace. It's strange how the smallest changes make the biggest difference. I didn't move to a new city. I didn't take new medicine. I didn't chase the next miracle cure. I simply stopped chasing anything at all. And in that pause, my mind began to heal itself. My doctor noticed too. During my next checkup, she smiled and said, "Your cognition tests have improved remarkably. What have you been doing?" I told her the truth. I started breathing again. She laughed, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. Now, at 65, I don't fear aging the way I once did. Yes, I still forget where I put my glasses sometimes, and I occasionally walk into a room wondering why I went there, but those moments don't scare me anymore, because I know my mind is alive, aware, and still capable of growing, even at this age. Every morning, when I sit by that same window and watch the sun rise, I think of the person I was before all this, anxious, distracted, convinced that forgetting was just part of getting old. Now I know better. Forgetting isn't inevitable. Disconnection is. Connection to breath, to stillness, to gratitude, that's the real cure. And it costs nothing but 5 quiet minutes of your time. If you're listening to this and you felt that same fear, the worry that you're losing yourself, please remember this: you are not broken. Your mind just needs space to rest, to breathe, and to feel safe again. Start small. Tomorrow morning, before you pick up your phone, before the rush of the day begins,
Sit still, close your eyes, and breathe. Even just for 60 seconds, you might be surprised at what returns to you when you stop trying to remember and start learning to be present. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like progress. It sounds like silence. It feels like calm. And it begins with one small decision to listen inward instead of outward. That's what I changed at 65. And because of it, I didn't just regain my memory. I regained myself. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone you love. You never know, it might be exactly the reminder they need today. And if you'd like to hear more of these stories about health, healing, and the quiet power of change, make sure to subscribe and join our little community here. Because tomorrow, I'm sharing something special, how one small evening habit can help your brain stay sharp for decades. Until then, take a deep breath and take care of your mind.